Hi, good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Good morning if you're on the West Coast, and good evening if you're in Europe or Asia. Welcome to the March 2021 Reach 3030. By the way, I think you may have noticed that we're holding the Reach 3030s every other month now, although Tosca 3030 is once a month. So we should probably change the name of the program to Reach 3060. But in any event, we'll keep that because we trademarked the name Reach 3030. Anyway, well, I appreciate you spending some time with us. You may notice that we actually have a new logo for Keller and Heckman. It's a very clean logo. I hope you like it because we spent a lot of money having this developed for us. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about PFAS, the fluorinated chemicals, which are called by many as forever chemicals. And we're going to talk about European regulation of PFAS. If you happen to be on the Tosca 3030, we talked about the U.S. regulation of PFAS. But the approach in Europe is quite different. As I explained, in the US, you have relatively little regulation, you have lots of litigation, and you have product stigmatization and NGOs working very hard to get consumer product companies to commit to stop using certain chemicals. That's the way that things get regulated in the US. The way that things get regulated in Europe is you have a large number of ban rules that are promulgated, relatively little enforcement, but that's the approach in Europe. Next slide, please. So I'm Herbert Stryker. I've given all of these, and that's my bio. And as always, we will post slides and a audio recording of the presentation on our website. You can find it by looking up Reach 30/30. I'm joined today again by my colleague, Alesh Bartel, who's a outstanding Czech lawyer in our Brussels office, and he is now a co-presenter on all these Reach 3030s. Next slide. Now, before we get to the actual heart of the matter, which is the regulation or bans, I don't even know if they're regulation, bans of PFAS chemicals in Europe, I wanted to talk about where PFAS falls in the overall context of what's going on in Europe. Now, we mentioned and we had programs before about something called the EU Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. Next slide. And so that is a very overarching program. It was announced by the Commission in October 2020, and we give you a link to that. We had a Reach 3030 presentation on this in August. And PFAS is actually the first set of chemicals that are going to be front and center under this new chemical strategy for sustainability. And it's going to be the first battlefield for certain concepts that are that play a role in the sustainability strategy. One is essential uses, and you may remember our discussion on essential uses is the idea if you have concerns about chemicals, get rid of all the uses except those deemed by bureaucrats in Brussels to be essential. The second is this notion of grouping. So the thing about PFAS is there's only documented adverse effects associated with two members of the family, PFOA, PFAS, but that is implicating a large number of some 600 different chemicals in the PFAS family. Next slide, please. So what's going on with the sustainability? Well, there was a Caracal meeting in March, very recently. So Caracal, if you remember, is the REACH and CLP competent authorities from all the member states, and the ECHA is involved in these meetings, as is the Commission, and these are the various authorities, and they get together to sort of look at what to do about various new initiatives. What they discussed in March, there's a roadmap for REACH revision. They plan to open REACH in a substantial way and revise it in many, many different ways. And there's also a work plan, a road plan to revise the classification, labeling, and packaging regulation, or CLP. Next slide. So the topics that they want to revise have been announced. in October 2020 communication, but no fleshing out of the details. By the way, one of the things that's being announced as they plan to reopen REACH to have registration of polymers, and we've had presentations on that, so that is coming. But there are many, many other things in this sort of grab bag of things that they're going to reopen the REACH legislation. None of it is to make things more practical and more, cost effective for industry. Not a single provision, not a single idea is being presented to do that. So if you think that REACH was a lot of fun before now, wait till you see the next version. So a couple of things they plan to do. For example, they plan to make it easier to restrict endocrine disruptors, PBTs, very persistent, very bioaccumulative chemicals, immunotoxins, neurotoxins, respiratory sensitizers, things of that nature. There's a fast track approach under REACH restrictions currently under Article 68.2 for Category 1 and 2 carcinogens, mutagens, reproductive toxicants, and consumer products. And there are also restrictions on packaging, things like child-resistant packaging, things of that nature. They want to extend that to packaging and for professional uses, not simply consumer uses. And they want to extend the fast track for REACH restrictions to professional uses, not only consumer uses. They will have exemptions for essential uses, whatever that means. Now, again, the idea of essential uses is that there would be sort of blanket bans with limited exceptions for uses that are deemed essential. And what they talk about when they mean essential are things like medical devices and things of that nature, pharmaceuticals. So the concept of essential use and banning everything but other than things that are considered essential is a very, very dangerous concept. It's likely to be very, very unpopular. It has a lot of, issues associated with it, and it's subject to legal challenge from many, many different fronts. But we'll see how that all plays out. Next slide, please. So what's the timing? As always, aggressive. So there's an impact assessment. There'll be a 4-week stakeholder consultation. If you care about what goes on in Europe, I suggest that you get involved in the stakeholder consultation, which I think has already started or start very soon. There's some work, some studies to support what's being proposed. There'll be the actual impact assessment will issue in the autumn of this year. And then there'll be draft proposals in 2022, and the commission legislation is projected for the end of 2022. So that's a very, very ambitious schedule. We'll see if they keep to that, but it'd be very interesting to see what happens. They want to do this running up to the next 5-year review of REACH, which is I think in 23. So that's what they want to do. 2023. So that's what's going on there. Next slide, please. So there's also changes in COP, and I won't go into that, but they mimic in many different ways the changes for REACH. They're going to apply to, all the sort of new hazard classes, endocrine disruptors, persistent mobile toxic chemicals, etc. And it's also planned to adopt legislation at the end of this year. Next slide, please. And PFAS, by the way, is one of the priority chemicals that are being assessed under this initiative, and focuses on there'll be restrictions of the use of all PFASs in firefighting foams. They want to address PFAS as a group. They want to address the concerns that PFAS causes on a global scale, and perhaps propose to list PFAS as a group under the Stockholm Convention, and et cetera. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Alesh.
Thank you, Herb. So in the second part of this presentation, we will focus on a future ban of the group of PFAS that, as Herb mentioned, includes several hundreds of substances. Next slide, please. So just a quick refresher. REACH restrictions are included in Annex 17 of the REACH regulation. And under the link, you can see the updated list of substances that are subject to a restriction. Next slide, please. So what is the status of the PFAS restriction proposal? So the driving member states are Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And we are not even at the first stage, at the first official stage of the process, because the restriction proposal has not been officially announced in the ECHA registry of intentions as yet. Of course, there are already several specific PFAS that are in the restriction process. PFOAs, PFOS already restricted, long chain PFCAs are nearing the Commission decision. There are also other PFAS that are in the restriction process, but the group itself is really at the beginning of the process. So the expected timing is that the restriction intention, so only intention, should be announced first half 2021. And first half 2022, the actual proposal should be published. And the proposal, of course, will already include all the substance and all the details. And the final restriction should be adopted in 2025. Under the link, you can see the registry of restriction intentions. So again, updated database of restriction procedures, and there you will see when the restriction proposal for PFAS will be announced. Next slide, please. So what will be the scope of the restriction? So the restriction will ban PFAS as a group, and later we will see what substances are included on their own, in mixtures and in articles above a specific threshold. And the threshold may be rather low, really, to exclude any intentional use and to cover only contaminants. For example, PFOA-related substances, already existing restriction under REACH, restricts PFO-related substances below 1 milligram per kilogram, and PFOA itself, it's even lower. I think it's 40 ppb. So it's very low, and the PFAS to be banned for all non-essential societal uses, as mentioned by Herb. And now, so of course, before the restriction proposal is published, one has to define, of course, what is non-essential uses. And this concept is currently being debated at the EU level, at the Caracal level. And the criteria should be developed mid-2021. And we will now see what is the most recent status of defining non-essential uses in the EU. Next slide, please. Last year there was a public consultation that was open to everybody on this concept. Of course, the European Commission received a lot of comments, and in March, Caracal published a document entitled "Summary of and Response to Comments to the Public Consultation on Essential Uses." This document is, of course, publicly available. Well, I think Caracal documents you have to actually subscribe to get access to Caracal documents. So maybe if you mail me, I can send you a copy of this Caracal document to make it easier. It provides some more insight on the concept. First, it states that the concept will go beyond REACH. So when defining essential uses, the authorities will not take into consideration only REACH restrictions, but also potential uses for other legislation. It provides that the concept of essentiality in the Montreal Protocol on ozone depleting substances will be used as a starting point to initiate discussions. So the Montreal Protocol takes into account 4 elements: criticality, alternatives, use or emission, and availability. So the Caracal document provides that availability is not relevant to REACH, and regarding use and alternatives, these are already addressed in the, for example, in the socio-economic analysis or in the risk assessment under the current restriction procedures. So it would appear that the essential use will mainly look into the criticality element, which is really an objective element, not taking into account alternatives and use, or not fully taking into account alternatives and use. So this adds to potential dangerous element of this of essential use concept. In the Caracal document, the Caracal document quotes Client Earth, who provides that the Montreal Protocol, the work of Cousins and others, and many EU regulations offer indications of the sectors that are non-essential. That means luxury, convenience, leisure, cosmetics, toys, or decorative products. So, of course, Client Earth is a quite prominent NGO in the EU that are quite influential. So, in my opinion, these segments are likely to be most affected by the essential use concept. And I mentioned Cousins and others, or it's mentioned here. So I would recommend this to your attention. It's a recent 2019 study of Cousins and others entitled "The Concept of Essential Use for Determining When Uses of PFAS Can Be Phased Out." And I think it provides also a very interesting quite interesting insight on how this concept may look in the future. Next slide, please. In the Caracal document, Client Earth proposed also the following criteria. Is the use relevant for safety or health? Are material, energy, performance, efficiency affected? Is the product without the substance accessible for the general public or for innovation? Whether or not the use significantly extends the lifetime of a product, improves durability, less consumption of raw materials, less consumption of energy. And on the negative front, whether the use creates a hazardous waste after a short lifetime. So overall, we can see that inspiration can come from the taxonomy regulation, which actually defines environmentally sustainable activities. It would appear that if PFAS are used in environmentally sustainable activities, then they may get the essential use status. And for example, in the 2019 preparatory works for this restriction at the Council of the European Union, it was mentioned that, for example, electric or hydrogen cars, the use of PFAS in electric or hydrogen cars can actually qualify for essential use. It has not been taken over yet by the European Commission, but it has been mentioned as a possible exemption. Next slide, please. So what are the PFAS covered, or what will likely be PFAS covered by the REACH restriction? Because as I said, there is nothing official yet. So I think it's very interesting to look at ECHA presentation of October 29, 2020 on the prepared PFAS restriction. I provided the link, so I recommend it to your attention. And so the proposal will likely include substances that contain at least one aliphatic CF2 or CF3 element. And of course, it includes precursors that can be transformed and degraded to PFAS as any other PFAS restriction so far. So this may cover many substances of various structures: PFAA, PFSAs, PFAEs, side chain and backbone fluorinated polymers, hydrofluorocarbons, side chain fluorinated aromatics, and others. Next slide, please. Now, there will be 2 public consultations on the restriction proposal, on the future restriction proposal. First public consultation will be launched immediately after the publication of the proposal. That means first half 2022. And the input from this public consultation will be used for the preparation of the draft risk assessment committee and SEAC opinions. It will last for 6 months, so it's rather long public consultation. It will be open to everybody. Second public consultation will be open after draft SEAC opinion will be published, and it will focus on economic aspects and on derogations, and it will last for 2 months. And there will also be additional advocacy possibility after the opinions, after the ECHA opinions will be issued at the European Commission stage, when the European Commission will discuss in the REACH committee the final restriction regulation. So there will always be there will still be possibility to advocate, for example, additional exemption. And we have example of Floor Council who actually managed to push an exemption during the long PFCA's restriction proposal at that stage. So it's possible. Next slide, please. So why it's important to participate at the public consultation? You will be able to request longer sell-off period, permanent derogation, and here actually you will have to claim that your use is essential use. It will be possible to request spare parts derogation, derogation from the scope. You can try to argue that some PFAS should be of the scope. But of course, this goes against the grouping idea, the grouping basics. So probably the institutions will not be very receptive to this. You can request a later date of applicability of the restriction. By default, it's usually between 12 and 24 months, but it can be longer if justified. So it really has to be justified to get a longer date of applicability. And you can request higher permitted concentration limits, which also had happened in the past, that they were raised as compared to what ECHA's committees proposed. The arguments to be used to substantiate your comments is socio-economic analysis. That, for example, you can claim that you have low emissions, low volumes, and that impact on consumers and economy would be high. On the other hand, high costs of substitution is not an argument. So that it would be expensive to phase out your product is not an argument. Another argument is that alternatives are not available yet. But if you claim this, then you should also demonstrate that research and development efforts are demonstrated. And it's also important to bear in mind that if you request confidentiality of your comments, it will usually be granted by the European Chemicals Agency. And last bullet point of this slide, I think it's quite important, because of course, if you get public in the public consultation, then it will be obvious that your company is associated with PFAS, which some companies may not want to that is public. So if your comment is submitted via a law firm or by a consultant, then your company name will not only be available to public, but also it will be confidential towards ECHA, and it has been already tested in the past public consultation. So this is important to bear in mind. So we can go to the final slide to final thoughts. As Herb mentioned, this is not an easy task. It's problematic or questionable from the perspective of EU legal principles. Grouping concept potentially encompassing harmless substances, non-essentiality concept, making societal decision may not be really in one of the powers of the European institutions. So there are proportionality issues, subsidiarity, legal certainty issues, abuse of power, freedom to conduct business. All these legal principles can be invoked to challenge any future initiatives, and not only, of course, PFAS restriction, but any other initiatives that are to come in within the chemical strategy for sustainability. And it's going to be a long process with numerous opportunities to participate in public consultations, not only for the REACH restrictions, but for any adjacent discussions principles. Let your voice to be heard.
Yeah. So somebody asked an interesting question. They say, can you discuss PFAS uses that may be easy or hard to argue is essential? For example, telecommunications might be essential, but not downloading movies quickly. Well, I have to tell you, to me, the ability to download a movie quickly is essential. And this is the whole problem with this concept. You can allow nameless, faceless bureaucrats in Brussels to decide for the consumer what's essential, what's not essential. So I think the whole concept of essential uses is really something that has to be reconsidered. But in any event, yes, obviously, if you're looking from the lens of someone sitting in Brussels and the Commission, I could see that downloading movies quickly may not be considered essential to that person, unless that person particularly enjoys doing that. Anyway, that's the problem with the essential use concept. Next slide, please. So our next OSHA 3030 is in March 24th, TSCA 3030 April 7th. Next slide, please. And so our next REACH 3030 is actually in 2 months. We're holding REACH 3030s every 2 months. And I don't know exactly what day it is, but it's going to be in May. I'm Herbert Stryker. I was joined by my colleague, Alesh Bartel. Thank you for participating. I'm sorry that many of you got kicked off about the last 5 minutes of the webinar, but so are the vagaries of working remotely. Take care, everybody. See you in 2 months or 1 month for TSCA 3030. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.